November 14th. Itenjo by Sisher. The moon hung full and bright over England. So bright that vehicles could navigate the roads without headlights. It was the kind of night poets might call beautiful. But for the people of Coventry, it would become a night they would call apocalyptic. At 7:20 p.m., the air raid sirens began their mournful wail. Within minutes, the sky filled with the thunderous drone of engines, not dozens of aircraft. Nearly 500 German bombers gathered from airfields across occupied Europe, converging on this single industrial city like a swarm of mechanical locusts. What followed was 11 hours of systematic destruction. 500 tons of high explosives, 33,000 incendiary bombs, 50 landmines dropped by parachute. The medieval cathedral of St. Michael's, standing for centuries, reduced to a skeletal ruin. 4,000 homes obliterated. A quarter of the city's factories turned to rubble, and when dawn finally broke, 507 souls lay dead. 420 more gravely wounded. The Germans would coin a new word for what they had done: Koventrieren, to coventrate, to annihilate, to reduce a city to ashes. But here's where our story takes a strange turn. Because while Coventry burned that terrible night, something equally extraordinary was happening just a few miles away, atop the windswept heights of Black Down in the Mendip Hills. There, in the darkness, fires were also raging, massive, carefully controlled conflagrations that lit up the countryside. But these fires were different. They weren't destruction. They were theater. They were illusion. They were hope disguised as flame. Men crouched in concrete bunkers beneath the earth, their hands on electrical switches, their eyes on the sky. They were waiting, listening. And when they heard the droning engines overhead, they did something that defied all human instinct. They made themselves a target. They turned on the lights. They set the fires burning brighter. They were inviting death to find them instead. This is the story of the Starfish sites, the dummy airfields, the phantom cities built of light and fire, places that existed for one reason only: to die so that others might live. It's the story of the greatest magic trick of World War II, performed not on a stage but across the British countryside, where film studio craftsmen became unlikely warriors, and illusion became the most powerful weapon of all. Welcome to the Cities of Fire, the phantom flames that saved thousands of lives. And tonight, we're going to uncover how Britain built an entire architecture of deception, one carefully controlled fire at a time. The question is, when faced with the most destructive force humanity had ever unleashed, could creativity triumph over annihilation? Could a burning lie save lives better than the cold truth? The answers are more incredible than you might imagine. To understand how Britain came to build cities made of fire, we need to rewind to the summer of 1940, when the nation stood alone against the Nazi war machine. The Battle of Britain had begun in July, a desperate aerial conflict that would rage through October. By day, Spitfires and Hurricanes clawed at German bombers over the English Channel. But when darkness fell, a new nightmare began. The Blitz. Night after night, waves of Luftwaffe bombers crossed the Channel under cover of darkness, their bellies full of high explosives and incendiary devices. British intelligence, extrapolating from World War I statistics, had calculated a horrifying projection. They feared the Germans might drop 35,000 tons of bombs in the first day alone. The psychological impact on civilians could be catastrophic. Cities might surrender. The government might fall. Britain itself might collapse from within. And the Germans knew exactly where to strike. Coventry wasn't chosen at random. This city of 238,000 souls was an industrial powerhouse. Car factories, bicycle manufacturers, aircraft engine plants, and since 1900, sprawling munitions factories that churned out the weapons Britain desperately needed. In the cold calculus of warfare, Coventry was what military strategists call a legitimate target. The city's defenses were woefully inadequate. Some barrage balloons floated lazily overhead, meant to deter low-flying aircraft. A handful of anti-aircraft guns. But compared to the fortress-like defenses around London, Coventry was practically naked. The German High Command understood this vulnerability perfectly. After Britain had the audacity to bomb Munich on November 8th, Hitler took it as a personal insult. The raid caused minimal damage, but it struck at the symbolic heart of the Nazi Party. Hitler wanted revenge. He wanted spectacle. He wanted to send a message that would echo across Britain like a death knell. Operation Moonlight Sonata was born. On that clear, moonlit night of November 14th, nearly 500 bombers assembled across occupied Europe. They came equipped with a new navigation system, radio directional beams that would guide them with unprecedented accuracy. The British had detected these beams by mid-afternoon. Their radio countermeasures headquarters tracking the invisible electronic fingers pointing directly at Coventry. But by the time anyone understood what was coming, it was too late to evacuate, too late to reinforce, too late to do anything but brace for impact. The attack began at 7:20 p.m. and didn't end until nearly dawn. 11 unrelenting hours. The Pathfinder squadrons dropped their incendiaries first, marking the target with rivers of flame. Then came the main force, wave after wave, adding high explosives to the growing inferno. The heat was so intense that smoke and flames reached the cockpits of German bombers 6,000 feet above. Pilots could smell the burning city. When morning came, the devastation was total. St. Michael's Cathedral stood as a burned-out shell, its spire somehow still reaching toward heaven like a skeletal finger. The central library, gone. The market hall, obliterated. 111 out of 180 factories damaged. 75 completely destroyed. The Coventry and Warwickshire Hospital, hit so badly that nurses, doctors, and patients perished together. The tram system was so thoroughly destroyed it would never run again. The tracks themselves had melted. Over 4,000 homes reduced to rubble. Survivors wandered through streets they could no longer recognize. Entire neighborhoods erased, as if they had never existed. In the days that followed, mass funerals were held. Fighter patrols circled overhead during the ceremonies because British command feared the Germans might bomb even the burials. That's how deep the terror ran. That's how desperate the situation had become. But Coventry wasn't alone. Birmingham, Liverpool, Manchester, Sheffield, Bristol, all the great industrial cities of Britain faced the same threat. Every clear night brought the possibility of annihilation. Every full moon was a harbinger of death. Something had to be done. Some solution had to be found. But how do you fight an enemy you can't reach? Bombing under cover of darkness with near impunity? The answer wouldn't come from more guns or more fighters or more concrete shelters. The answer would come from somewhere far more unexpected. From the creative minds of film studio craftsmen, from stage designers and lighting technicians, from men who understood that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't the one that destroys, but the one that deceives. And leading this unlikely army of illusion makers was a man they would come to call the dictator of dummies. His name was Colonel John Fisher Turner, born in 1881. A career Royal Engineer who had spent decades building airfields for the Royal Air Force. By 1931, he had risen to become Director of Works and Buildings at the Air Ministry in London. He was a qualified pilot himself. He understood infrastructure. He understood construction. And most importantly, He understood something that would prove invaluable in the coming war. He understood perspective, how things looked from the air. When war broke out in September 1939, Turner was technically retired, but the Air Ministry called him back with an unusual mission. They needed someone to create decoys, false targets, dummy installations that could draw German bombers away from real airfields and factories. It was a desperate gamble, born of desperation. But Turner seized it with an engineer's precision and an artist's imagination. His first creations were simple, K-sites. They called them daytime decoys, dummy airfields scattered across the countryside, complete with fake aircraft, worn vehicle tracks, disturbed ground made to look like bomb dumps and fuel storage. From 5,000 feet up, they looked real enough. But there was a problem. These wooden mock-ups, produced by aircraft manufacturers, cost a fortune. Britain was hemorrhaging money on the war effort. They needed something cheaper, something faster. That's when Turner made a decision that would change everything. He turned to the film industry. 15 miles southwest of London, in the leafy suburb of Shepperton, stood a sprawling estate called Littleton Park. 60 acres of grounds surrounding a beautiful 17th century manor house. But since 1932, this pastoral setting had been transformed into something else entirely. Sound City Film Studios, owned by a dynamic Scottish businessman named Norman Loudon. Loudon had made his fortune selling flicker books, those small booklets of sequential photographs that created the illusion of movement when you flipped the pages with your thumb. He understood visual trickery. He understood how to make the fake look real, and his studios were staffed with craftsmen who were masters of illusion. Set designers who could make a soundstage look like anything from a medieval castle to a modern factory. Lighting technicians who could create moonlight, sunlight, or the glow of a burning city with nothing but bulbs and gels. Carpenters who could build entire buildings in days. In 1939, Turner set up his headquarters at Sound City. The film studio became a military installation, though its true purpose remained classified. And the craftsmen who had once built sets for romantic comedies and adventure films now found themselves building something far more consequential, weapons made of wood and canvas and light. The K-sites were just the beginning. Turner's team mass-produced dummy Hurricanes and Spitfires. These weren't crude mock-ups. They were convincing from above, complete with fake rivets and painted panel lines. Green Brothers Limited, a company in Hailsham that had previously manufactured garden furniture, churned out these decoy aircraft at £50 each, a fraction of what the real manufacturers charged. RAF crews were stationed at these dummy airfields with specific instructions. Move the fake aircraft periodically to simulate activity. Create worn paths in the grass. Make it look alive. Up to 20 men might staff a single K-site, all dedicated to maintaining the illusion. But as autumn turned to winter in 1940, Turner realized the daytime decoys weren't enough. The Germans had adapted. They were bombing at night, now, using the cover of darkness and sophisticated radio beam navigation systems. The K-sites, no matter how realistic, were useless after sunset. So Turner evolved the concept, Q-sites. He called them night decoys. These were far more sophisticated. Lights mounted on poles to simulate an airfield's approach lighting. Yellow bulbs arranged in a T-shape to mark runways and indicate wind direction, with 4 alternative configurations that could be switched on command. Red lamps positioned to indicate tall buildings and obstacles. And most clever of all, a car headlamp mounted on a movable platform, operated by hand to simulate an aircraft taxiing across the tarmac from 5 miles away. A German pilot would see exactly what he expected, a working airfield preparing to receive aircraft. The Q-sites could be operated by just 2 men working from a control bunker. When the phone rang with warning of an incoming raid, one man would start the generator while the other rushed to the control panel. They would activate the runway lights, the obstruction markers, and begin manually moving the headlamp back and forth, creating the illusion of activity below. Then came the Germans' use of incendiary bombs. Thousands of fire-starting devices raining down on British cities, turning them into infernos. Turner saw an opportunity in this new tactic. German pilots had standing orders. If you see fires burning, add more incendiaries to them. Assume it's your target already hit by the first wave. Finish the job. Turner added fire to his Q sites, dubbing them QF, or Q-fire locations. Initially crude, just controlled burns managed from concrete pillboxes. But the concept was sound. Light fires after the first bombing wave. Hope the second wave mistakes your decoy for the real target already burning. But after Coventry, everything changed. The scale of destruction, the surgical precision of the German attack, the sheer number of bombers involved. It demanded a response equally ambitious. Churchill himself ordered Turner to expand the program. Not just airfields, on tier cities. Turner referred to these new installations as Special Fire Sites, SF for short. But the first one, constructed on the windswept plateau of Blackdown in the Mendip Hills to protect Bristol, was given a more evocative code name by its construction crew. They called it Starfish. The name stuck. Soon every SF site in Britain would bear that name. The Starfish sites were engineering marvels disguised as chaos, positioned approximately 4 miles from the city they protected, and at least a mile from any other settlement. They occupied vast stretches of open countryside. The Blackdown installation protecting Bristol used fires fueled by a mixture of creosote and water to simulate exploding incendiary bombs. But that was just the beginning. Glow boxes scattered across the landscape replicated the street lighting of Bristol, the railways, even the docks. These weren't simple lights. They were powered by Coventry climax, petrol engines driving electrical generators, all housed in 2 buried concrete bunkers. Inside these bunkers, crews would wait in the darkness, telephones connecting them to the Observer Corps and Fighter Command, waiting for the word that German bombers were inbound. The deception had to be perfect. German reconnaissance had photographed British cities extensively. The layout of streets, the placement of factories, the configuration of rail yards. All of it was meticulously documented. So Turner's team studied those same photographs and recreated them in miniature. Not the buildings themselves, but the signatures they would leave from the air, light patterns, heat signatures, smoke plumes. By January 1941, the program had expanded to 43 sites, protecting 13 cities. By March, over 100 sites were operational, and Turner's headquarters at Shepperton had become a factory of illusions, turning out not just dummy aircraft, but entire dummy installations. The sound stages, massive structures the size of aircraft hangars, were requisitioned by the government. First, they stored sugar there, mountains of it. Then they began producing Wellington bomber replicas at 225 pounds each, destined for dummy airfields across Britain and in North Africa. The craftsmen, the carpenters, the set designers, they worked around the clock. What had once been used to create romantic fantasies for cinema audiences was now being weaponized against the Luftwaffe. And the strange thing was, it worked. It actually worked. By the end of the war, 237 Starfish sites would protect 81 locations across Britain. Approximately 230 dummy airfields, 400 fake urban and industrial sites, an entire phantom nation built of light and fire and carefully crafted illusion. But the true measure of success wouldn't be found in statistics. It would be measured in the faces of people who never knew how close death had come. In the homes that stood while bombs fell harmlessly into empty fields miles away. In the children who grew up, never knowing that somewhere in the darkness, men crouched in concrete bunkers and deliberately made themselves targets so that others might live. Picture yourself on the night of April 2nd, 1945, on a windswept stretch of marshland called Sina Common on Hayling Island, just off the coast of Hampshire. The target the Germans want is Portsmouth, one of Britain's most vital naval bases. Barely visible across the dark water. But you're not in Portsmouth. You're 4 miles away, crouched in a concrete bunker half buried in the earth. And your job tonight is to become more interesting than a city full of warships. The bunker is cold. Damp seeps through the concrete walls despite your best efforts. It's divided into 2 rooms, separated by a central passage, protected by a high blast wall at the entrance. The left room is your operations center. A telephone connects you to Fighter Command. Mechanical switches line one wall, each one controlling a different element of the elaborate deception spread across the marshland above. There's a bunk bed, though you'll get no sleep tonight. An escape hatch, in case things go catastrophically wrong. The right room houses the generators, Coventry climax, petrol engines. Their mechanical hearts ready to pump electricity through hundreds of yards of wiring. The concrete pads that hold them are still visible, worn smooth by years of vibration. A stove base sits in your operations room, cold iron that on other nights provides blessed warmth. But tonight, you can't risk smoke giving away your true position before the show begins. It's 9:15 p.m. when the telephone rings. Your partner grabs it. Bandits inbound. Portsmouth. First wave in 20 minutes. You both know what this means. Somewhere to the south. Across the channel. The first wave of German bombers has already hit Portsmouth. Incendiaries first. Dropped by the Pathfinder squadrons. Marking the target with rivers of flame. The theory is simple, almost elegant in its brutality. After the Pathfinders mark the target, follow-on waves of bombers will add high explosives to the growing conflagration, and intelligence from captured Luftwaffe crews confirms they have standing orders. If you see fires burning, assume that's your target. Add more bombs. Make it worse. Your partner moves to the generator room. The Coventry climax engine coughs to life. A mechanical growl that fills the bunker. You're at the control panel now. Fingers on the switches. Above you, spread across Sign of Common, lies an elaborate theater set designed for an audience flying at 6,000 feet. There are 4 types of fire mechanisms scattered across the marsh. Basket fires filled with combustible materials soaked in paraffin and creosote, bounded by firebreak trenches to prevent the deception from becoming an actual disaster. There are steel tanks, troughs, pipes, and grids that can pour, spray, or trickle fuel at timed intervals. Some fires simulate burning houses, sudden bright bursts. Others mimic factory fires, sustained glows with billowing smoke. Still others replicate the distinctive look of a burning oil facility, with black smoke and intense heat. 9:32 p.m. You hear them. That distinctive drone, like distant thunder that grows and grows until it fills your entire world. Your hand moves to the first switch. The glow boxes activate. Hundreds of light bulbs arranged in patterns that, from above, will look like the streets of Portsmouth. The rail yards. The docks. For a moment, Common becomes a mirror image of the city across the water. Then you throw the second switch. The basket fires ignite in sequence. Carefully choreographed explosions of light and heat, creosote flames leap skyward, orange and furious. Within seconds, the marsh is transformed into a vision of apocalypse. Exactly what German pilots expect to see when they arrive at their target already hit by the Pathfinders. The drone grows louder. Through the ventilation slits in your bunker, you can see the sky. And then you see them. Dark shapes crossing the moon. Dozens of them. Heinkel 111 Sekunde. Dernier 210 à 7 secondes. The mechanical locusts of the Luftwaffe. The first bomb falls at 9:37 p.m. You hear it. That distinctive whistle that starts high and drops in pitch as it accelerates toward Earth. Then, the explosion. A percussion that you feel in your chest, even through concrete and earth. Then, another, and another. They're taking the bait. For the next 6 hours and 50 minutes. Sina Common becomes the most bombed stretch of empty marshland in Britain. Over 500 bombs fall that night. 500 bombs that don't fall on Portsmouth. Don't hit the naval base. Don't kill sailors or dock workers or the families sleeping in their home. Inside your bunker, the world is reduced to sound and sensation. The steady thrum of your generators. The crash of explosions. Some close enough to shake dust from the concrete ceiling. The acrid smell of smoke and burning oil that seeps through every crack. Your ears ring. Your hands shake on the switches as you keep the fires burning. Keep the lights blazing. Keep the illusion alive. There's a moment, around 2 a.m., when a bomb falls so close that the bunker shakes violently. Your partner looks at you in the dim light of the control room. Neither of you speaks, but you both understand. You're playing a game where the only way to win is to make the enemy want to destroy you. Every bomb that falls here is a success. Every explosion is a life saved somewhere else. At 4:12 a.m., the telephone rings again. All clear. Last bandits heading east. You throw the switches. The fires begin to die. The lights go dark. Sina Common returns to darkness, pockmarked with fresh craters. But you're alive. Your partner kills the generator. In the sudden silence, you can hear your own heartbeat. When dawn breaks, damage assessment teams will arrive. They'll count the craters. Over 500 bomb strikes on and around Sina Common. In Portsmouth itself, only 8 bombs found their mark. 8 out of more than 500 dropped by German bombers, convinced they were finishing off a burning naval base. This is what success looks like in the world of deception warfare. Empty fields cratered by high explosives, marshland scorched by incendiaries, and a city across the water that survived because someone had the audacity to build a fake version of itself and set it on fire. Across Britain, this scene plays out night after night. 237 Starfish sites, hundreds of dummy airfield, thousands of men who volunteered to make themselves targets. The official numbers would eventually claim approximately 100 attacks on the decoy sites. Nearly 1,000 tons of German ordnance dropped on empty countryside, an estimated 2,500 lives saved, 3,000 injuries prevented. But here's the haunting question that would echo long after the war ended. How many of those German pilots knew? How many looked down at the burning decoys and understood they were being deceived, but dropped their bombs anyway? Grateful for an excuse not to kill? So here's where our story enters more uncertain territory. Because determining the true effectiveness of the Starfish sites and dummy airfields requires us to ask uncomfortable questions. Questions that don't have clean answers. Questions that blur the line between documented fact and reasonable doubt. Let's start with the official numbers. In his comprehensive 2000 study, Fields of Deception, Britain's Bombing Decoys of World War II, historian Colin Dobinson meticulously compiled Colonel Turner's conservative estimates. His conclusion: the Starfish decoys diverted approximately 968 tons of German bombs. The 1,946 official figures declared that decoy sites saved an estimated 2,500 lives and prevented 3,000 injuries. 4 civilians were killed through raids on the decoy sites themselves. On paper, these numbers suggest a remarkable success. Nearly 1,000 tons of explosives dropped on empty fields instead of populated areas. Thousands of people who went to bed and woke up the next morning, never knowing how close death had come. But here's the first crack in the story. In 1992, archaeologists conducted a thorough survey of the original Starfish site on Black Down in the Mendip Hills. They were looking for bomb craters, physical evidence that would confirm the site had indeed been attacked. They found none, despite claims of its existence, despite the official records. The ground itself told a different story. No craters, no unexploded ordnance, no physical proof that a single German bomb had fallen there. Now, before we jump to conclusions, we need to consider the complexities. Post-war analysts agreed that bombs dropped within a 2-mile radius of a decoy site should count as influenced attacks. Why? Because anti-aircraft fire could throw off a bomber's aim. Fighter aircraft harassing the formation could cause pilots to release early. Weather conditions, navigation errors, mechanical failures. All of these could result in bombs falling near, but not on the decoy site itself. So the absence of craters at Black Down doesn't necessarily mean the site was ineffective. It might mean the Germans bombed the general area, convinced they were hitting Bristol, but with typical wartime inaccuracy spread their ordnance across the countryside. Or it might mean something else entirely. Which brings us to theory number 2. The Germans were playing the same game, and they knew it. Here's something that doesn't get talked about enough. The Germans built their own large-scale nighttime decoys. The Krupp Steelworks in Essen, one of the most vital industrial targets in the Reich, had its own elaborate dummy installation. They called it the Kruppsche Nachscheinanlage. The Germans understood deception warfare just as well as the British did. So imagine you're a Luftwaffe pilot in late 1941. You've flown dozens of missions over Britain. You've seen how the British black out their cities, how their anti-aircraft defenses work, how their night fighters patrol. And then one night, you're approaching what's supposed to be Sheffield, and suddenly you see fires burning in the countryside, conveniently positioned along your approach route. Lights arranged in suspiciously perfect patterns. Everything a little too neat, a little too obvious. Do you really believe this is Sheffield? Or do you suspect it's a decoy? A trap designed to waste your bombs and your fuel on empty fields? Here's where it gets psychologically complex. Because even if you suspect it's a decoy, dropping your bombs, there still serves a purpose. You've completed your mission. You can report bombs released on target. You don't have to fly deeper into Britain's air defenses. You don't have to risk the concentrated anti-aircraft fire over the actual city. You can turn around, head home, and maybe, just maybe, survive this war. There's a famous story that circulated after the war, one that captures this ambiguity perfectly. According to journalist William L. Shire's diary from November 27th, the Germans had constructed an elaborate wooden decoy airfield near Amsterdam, complete with wooden hangars, wooden aircraft, wooden fuel tanks, the whole setup. The British discovered it, and, allegedly, they responded by sending a single aircraft across the channel to drop a large wooden bomb on the wooden airfield. Wood for wood. The message supposedly read. The story became legendary. It appeared in multiple accounts, with varying details. Sometimes it was the British dropping wooden bombs on German decoys. Sometimes it was the Germans dropping them on British decoys. Sometimes it happened in Holland. Sometimes in Germany. Sometimes in occupied France. In 1943, a German veteran claimed they received between 6 and 10 wooden bombs at a decoy site, all marked with the same message. Was it real? Probably, at least in some instances. Museums have preserved examples of these wooden bombs. But here's the deeper question. Why would either side go to such effort? Flying a dangerous mission just to drop a wooden bomb seems like an extraordinary waste of resources and risk. Unless the message wasn't for the enemy. Unless the message was for their own side. A way of saying, yes, we know you're deceiving us, and we're acknowledging it. But let's all agree to keep playing this game, because it's better than the alternative. Which leads us to theory number 3. The Starfish sites worked not because they fooled the Germans, but because they gave both sides an acceptable alternative to total war. Think about it from a strategic perspective. By late 1941, both Britain and Germany were locked in a conflict. Neither could afford to lose, but neither seemed capable of winning. The bombing campaigns were achieving limited military value at enormous cost in aircraft, crews, and moral authority. Both sides were engaged in what would later be recognized as strategic terror bombing of civilian populations. The decoy sites offered an out. German bomber crews could report missions accomplished without having to face the concentrated defenses of major cities. British civilians got some measure of protection, and both governments could claim they were prosecuting the war effectively. It's a cynical theory, perhaps, but war makes cynics of us all. Then there's theory number 4, and this one's darker. What if Churchill knew about Coventry in advance and let it happen to protect the decoy program? This conspiracy theory has persisted for decades. The play One Night in November at the Belgrade Theatre in Coventry explicitly dramatized the claim. The logic goes like this. British codebreakers at Bletchley Park had cracked the German Enigma cipher. Decrypts revealed Operation Moonlight Sonata was coming. Churchill knew. But evacuating Coventry would tip off the Germans that their codes were compromised. So he sacrificed the city to protect the secret. The truth is more complex and less dramatic. Yes, the British knew a major attack was coming. The decrypt even included the operation's code name, but it didn't specify the target until the German radio directional beams locked onto Coventry at approximately 3 p.m. on November 14th. Once that happened, the Air Ministry ordered immediate countermeasures. 8 RAF bombers attacked the German airfields where the raiders were staging. Fighter patrols were deployed over Coventry. Anti-aircraft defenses were reinforced. The city had 5 times as many anti-aircraft guns per capita as London that night. It wasn't enough. But it wasn't betrayal either. Just the fog of war, the limitations of technology, and the brutal mathematics of aerial warfare. What these theories share is uncertainty. The uncomfortable acknowledgement that even 70+ years later, we can't say with absolute certainty how effective the decoy program really was. We have statistics. But statistics can be manipulated. We have official reports. But official reports have agendas. We have archaeological surveys. But absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. What we do know is this. Britain built 237 Starfish sites and hundreds of dummy installations. Men volunteered to staff them. They sat in concrete bunkers and deliberately made themselves targets. And whether the Germans were fooled or merely played along, bombs fell on empty countryside that might otherwise have fallen on homes and schools and hospitals. In the end, maybe that's enough. Today, if you know where to look, you can still find them. Crumbling concrete bunkers half hidden in the British countryside, slowly being reclaimed by vegetation and time. Most people walk past without noticing. Farmers plow fields around them. Hikers mistake them for old storage sheds or forgotten wartime infrastructure of no particular significance. In 2005, archaeologist Dr. Bill Bevan was surveying Burbage Moor in Derbyshire, searching for evidence of ancient settlement. Instead, he found something more recent: disturbances in the landscape, sunken control rooms, the unmistakable footprint of a Starfish site, built to protect Sheffield during the darkest days of the Blitz. It had been completely forgotten. Even local residents who had lived there for decades had no idea what the strange concrete structures really were. That's the fate of most deception sites. Unlike monuments to military victory, there's no glory in admitting you built fake cities and set them on fire. The program remained classified for years after the war ended. Those who operated the sites were sworn to secrecy, and most took that oath seriously. Even when the story finally emerged, it emerged quietly, without fanfare, acknowledged in academic studies and specialized histories, but absent from the popular narrative of World War II. But here's what those crumbling bunkers represent. They're monuments to an unusual kind of courage. Not the courage of soldiers charging into battle, but the courage of creative professionals who turned their talents toward survival. Film studio craftsmen who built sets, knowing the audience would be trying to destroy them. Lighting technicians who designed illumination schemes meant to attract death. Carpenters who constructed phantom cities that existed only to burn. And most of all, they represent the courage of the men who staffed those sites. Think about what was being asked of them. Sit in a concrete box underground, wait for the telephone to ring. When it does, flip the switches that turn you into a target. Then sit there, in the darkness, listening to bombs fall around you, hoping the concrete above your head is thick enough, hoping your calculations were right and the Germans aimed for the center of the decoy instead of the bunker itself. They weren't soldiers. Most were RAF ground crew, support staff, men considered too old or too valuable in other capacities for frontline combat duty. They didn't have weapons. If German paratroopers had dropped on their location, they would have been defenseless. Their only protection was obscurity and the hope that nobody would bother bombing an empty field after the war was over. Night after night, they reported for duty. They climbed down into those bunkers. They waited for the call, and when it came, they performed their strange theater for an audience that wanted them dead. There's a profound irony here. To save lives, they had to simulate death. To protect real cities, they had to build ghost cities. To preserve civilization, they had to become practitioners of deception, an art usually associated with con men and propagandists, not heroes. But maybe that's the point. Maybe that's the lesson the Starfish sites teach us across the decades. That heroism doesn't always look like we expect it to. That creativity can be as powerful a weapon as any gun or bomb. That sometimes the most effective way to fight is not to fight at all, but to redirect, to deceive, to offer your enemy an alternative that serves both your purposes. The modern military has largely abandoned this kind of deception. Satellite surveillance and thermal imaging have made it nearly impossible to create convincing decoys. Wooden airplanes and controlled fires can't fool orbital sensors. The age of inflatable tanks and dummy installations has passed into history, rendered obsolete by technology. But the principle remains valid. The understanding that sometimes the best defense is to make your enemy waste their strength on shadows and illusions, while the things that matter survive intact. So what really happened on those nights between 1940 and 1943? When fires blazed in the British countryside and bombs fell on empty marshlands, were the Germans truly deceived? Or were they complicit in a shared fiction that allowed both sides to step back from the abyss of total war? Did the Starfish sites save 2,500 lives? Or 5,000? Or 50? Did they change the course of the war? Or were they merely a footnote? A curious experiment that provided comfort more than protection? We may never know with certainty. The men who operated those sites are gone now, taking their experiences with them. The German pilots who flew over them have passed on as well. The archives are incomplete. The physical evidence is ambiguous. All we're left with are the crumbling bunkers, the statistical estimates, and the haunting knowledge that somewhere in the darkness of those desperate years, Someone decided that building cities of fire might save cities of flesh and blood. And perhaps, in the end, that act of creative defiance matters more than whether it succeeded completely, because it represents something fundamental about human nature. When faced with overwhelming destruction, we don't just hide. We don't just endure. We create, we imagine, we build elaborate fictions and set them ablaze. And we dare the darkness to tell the difference between what's real and what we've conjured from light and shadow and desperate hope. So the next time you're in the British countryside, and you see a strange concrete structure half buried in a hillside, covered in moss and brambles, consider what it might represent. Not just a relic of war, but a monument to the stubborn human insistence that creativity, illusion, and art itself can be weapons against annihilation. The fires of the Starfish sites burned bright and false, but the lives they protected burned real and true. And maybe that's the only truth that matters.